All right, welcome everyone to the AABHE Online Education and Engagement Series. I'm your facilitator and you aren't here to see me or hear me, so we're going to go through some of our ground rules. And the first one is to please keep your mics muted during the presentation, during the talks. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat session. I will be going in there and I will be getting those questions and compiling them towards the end. And please use and abide by our golden rule. And we want to treat those the way we would like to be treated. And so if you can, again, please keep those mics muted as you're entering in. I've changed some settings, so hopefully that will resolve it. But if you're calling on a phone, sometimes it's a little bit difficult for me to override the phone system. But we are going to go ahead and get started with our welcome.
Greetings, everyone. This is Derek Rivera. I serve as the president for the American Association of Blacks in Higher Ed, and I want to welcome you on behalf of our organization to our second webinar. Our first was a huge success, and witness that we had to expand our bandwidth to enable more people to join us. And at last count, we had over 400 people registered for this webinar, which is a testament to the fine quality that Dr. Silver presented a few weeks ago. As an organization, we have striven very hard to be the premier organization for Blacks in higher education. And we would welcome each and every one of you who are joining us on this Zoom, if you're not a member, to visit us at our website. That's AABHE, American Association of Blacks in Higher Education. Education. You have to write out the whole word education. EDU will not get you there. But when you get there, you'll see so many of the benefits that this organization is able to offer, not the least of which you're participating in now. So webinars and informative information sessions such as this. We'll have a writing workshop in the next couple of weeks coming up in this summer. We have a Leadership Mentoring Institute, which is a professional development experience that normally happens in the summer. But again, due to our current circumstances, we will postpone that until next summer. And you probably have already heard, if you were on the call early, from several of the alums from that program. Phenomenal way to advance yourself and to assist others. We have an international study tour that we do every 2 years. This year we're scheduled to go to the Middle East, but again, because of travel restrictions, we push that back till next year. So next year, and I will give Dr. Silver the mic in a minute. He'll probably let you know that there's still room if you want to join us, given the change from 2020 to 2021. Phenomenal opportunity to study, spend 10 days studying an international destination. We have a career center, which again, given these times, will probably be more and more important for folks as jobs change and opportunities change. And so you can post jobs there, you can seek jobs there. We have newsletters, we have Wednesday Word. We try to get the information to folks relative to what Blacks in higher education and what's happening in reference to African Americans in higher education. And so as an organization, we're there for you and we're here for you. We also, unfortunately, we're unable to have our annual conference, which is one of the highlights of this organization. But we've already planned for San Diego in March of 2021 and Charleston, South Carolina for March of 2022. So these activities and events are held for you and by you. This is a membership organization made up of faculty, staff, administrators, alums, retired folks, and just friends of higher education. So if it's something that you're interested in, something you want to know more about, come and join us. I hope you have an informative time with Dr. Wheelan, and I know you will. Please enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Derek, for those words. And I just want to thank everybody again for Zooming in with us today. I thank you also for participating. Many of you participated in the first webinar that we had, and it was a huge success. And you asked for a follow-up. And so the board felt that it would be good to focus in on one area. And the area that they wanted to focus on was the impact of the COVID on accreditation. And so we could think of no one better than Dr. Belle Wheelan to lead us through that process. And Dr. Wheelan needs no introduction. I mean, everybody on this Zoom I know her. But the very short version of her career is that she's been a college president twice. She was also the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And since I think 2005, been with SAC-COC as the president of SAC-COC par excellence. So I had the great pleasure of working with her for a few years. And I know how busy she is. And I was just plumb delighted when she agreed to do this webinar. So I'm going to ask Dr. Wheelan to greet you all first, and then we're going to get into a question and answer kind of exchange with her. And at the end of our interchange, we're going to open it up for questions from the group. Dr. Wheelan.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. It's always a pleasure to be in your company, and it's really fantastic to see so many friends and employees of member institutions. So I feel like this is a family reunion here rather than anything else. And I see Carlton Brown on there, and I'll give him credit for liberating you away from me, Dr. Silver. So this is probably the most challenging time for higher education in my 46-year history. I've been through 2 recessions, but nothing has hit our institutions like this pandemic has, because all of our options have been taken away from us. And so I commend all of you for surviving it. It is calling upon all of your talents and all of your creativity to make things work and still maintain the quality that your institutions, for which your institutions are known. So congratulations to you all.
Well, Dr. Wheelan, that really leads us right into the first question that I have for you. And that is, I know that since you've been president of SAC-COC, you've had to administer universities and colleges through floods, hurricane, tornadoes. I remember Hurricane Katrina and what we had to do there. But how does this pandemic compare to those disasters in the past in terms of your work and the impact on institutions?
Well, as I said, we have no choices here. Every state and every city and every institution has been impacted by this. When we've had natural disasters, we've always been able to find another facility to use in order to accommodate students. But now everything is closed down. And so we have different states that have different shelter-in-place orders. I live in Georgia, where the governor has opened up everything except nightclubs, I think, as of today. So it's just a challenge because there's nothing there. The good news, though, is that the federal government has stepped up with money to accommodate some of the changes that are going to have to be made, and that's not something that has happened as quickly as it did for institutions that had specific tragedies, because it was not a national phenomenon. And so I think they were slower to respond. But right now, a lot of flexibility has been granted to accreditors, and some dollars have been set aside for institutions. So it's
before we get into the substance of the questions, I just want to pose another question to you. Prior to COVID-19, what was your biggest challenge at SAC-COC?
Well, part of my challenge was going through the revision of the new standards and trying to convince institutions that the quality enhancement plan was still viable. I do also recognize, Dr. Silver, that there are people on this webinar who are not from the Southern region. And I want to assure you that all of the accreditors have been talking with each other, comparing notes and trying to make sure that we're being responsive to institutions. We're all recognized by the U.S. Department of Education and have some of the same flexibility. So I'm pretty confident that most of the things that I will say will be applicable across the country.
Fantastic. So let me give you a very broad question.
Check with your own accreditor, and just to be sure. I'm sorry.
Let me give you a very broad question that will give us an opportunity to segue into other questions later on. But the broad question is, can you tell us what the commission has done and have been doing to assist member institutions during this COVID-19?
First thing we did was to all go home, but to make sure that our telephones were transferred to our homes or our cell phones, so that communication would not be lost with staff. That to me was very important. So you should still be able to get in touch with your staff member either by phone or by email. We extended the accreditation of about 23 institutions that were scheduled to have visits this spring. rather than, because we didn't know how long this was going to last or how we were going to deal with it, we said we just would stay accredited for another year. And between or among the summer, fall, and spring of 20 and 21, we would get those visits finished. So that way, no one's lost their accreditation because we couldn't get to an on-site visit. We had some special committees that were in place that were for institutions that were on sanction or looking at mergers or things, or we even had a candidate institution. And so we have rescheduled those committee visits through the summer. That meant then that we had to reschedule our summer board meeting because it was scheduled the 1st of June. Now it's going to be the end of August, so that the actions that would ordinarily have been voted upon in June will now be voted upon in August, with an exception of those institutions that had requested new program approvals for which they wanted to offer beginning in the fall semester. Because with that board meeting being after the beginning of the fall semester, they weren't going to be able to do that. So there's a special committee of the board that's going to meet in June to look at those program requests and the mergers that we had in place, because a couple of them are legislatively mandated. We supported the pass-fail grade system that institutions wanted to put in that and got senior institutions to agree to accept for the spring semester transfer grades of P and F from community colleges over to senior institutions. It's kind of, people have been referring to it as the asterisk semester, if that is a word, because again, everybody's impacted by it. There was one institution that the students wanted to see if we couldn't just give a blanket pass grade to every student, irrespective of what their grade was at the time the pandemic hit. And we assured them that academic integrity would not permit that, but that we encouraged them to work with their faculty members to see if they couldn't get grades of incomplete or, do something else that would bring those grades up. But we do recognize that P's and F's are there. We have a question that's still outstanding about dual enrollment programs. This is a national question, actually, because with colleges giving pass-fail grades, it impacts the athletic eligibility of high school students, the class ranking of high school students, as well as eligibility of state scholarship programs, such as the Hope Scholarship in Georgia. So we're still working with ACE and the Big Six to see if we can come out, and the American Association of Secondary School Administrators, which is the superintendents, to see if we can't come up with some kind of language that would accommodate those students, even if they have to do an individual grade calculation for them. We have rescheduled our offsites. They were supposed to meet in April. They're now meeting literally next week. We have gone to a hybrid model of visits. The Department of Education had given us flexibility to change things. And one of those flexibilities for us was for those institutions that had not been permitted or had not been approved for online instruction, we just gave them that approval. That approval, however, runs out right now, the end of June. We petitioned the Department of Ed to at least run it through the end of the fall semester because it's time to plan and people have to get ready. So, but we have encouraged them to go on and apply for approval to offer online instruction. We have tried not to change dates for the fall yet because we don't quite know what's going to happen in the fall. So those compliance certifications and fifth-year reports are still going to be due. Our Summer Institute is still scheduled for July. We're hopeful that Florida has opened up, so we're hopeful that there's enough people who can, get away. They'll probably want to get away by that time from being closed up at home, so that's still going on. Our executive council, you can see that we've not been just sitting around enjoying working at home. Our executive council has developed 3 position statements to help guide institutions in the areas of finance, assessment, and quality, so that they'll understand that we understand everybody's going to be impacted by this, but the reality is we're still expecting people to live within their means, to make sure that the quality of instruction, whether it's on campus or online, is the same as it always has been, and that there's a way to assess student behavior. So those are a handful of things that we've been doing. Most of the accreditors have gone to some kind of virtual meetings and campus visits. Ours has been what I call a hybrid model. Our vice presidents always travel with our on-site committees, and so as long as the staff member and one committee member can go to the institution, then everybody else has been available virtually. That way, any of the documents that have to be reviewed on site, any people that have to be interviewed on site can still happen. The department's flexibility had allowed accreditors to do totally virtual meetings, but then had required them to go back after the fact to do a campus interview. And that just seemed like double duty and on both the staff and the institution. So we opted for a hybrid model where we can accomplish both at one time.
Well, thank you. And that really covered a lot of the issues that I think we need to talk about. I do want to circle back on two. One, is there anything that we as connoisseurs of higher education need to know about where the Department of Education stands on many of these issues? And is there anything that is coming down the pipeline from the Department of Education as it relates to some of the issues that you brought forth?
Well, the partly cloudy weather in Atlanta today has messed up my crystal ball, so I'm not quite sure I can tell you what the future is going to hold. They have been extremely forgiving and flexible in what's going on. They understand the impact of this and that everyone is impacted. And I said earlier, the money has flowed very quickly. We've been pleased of that. They've allowed some flexibility in the way we do business so that institutions are held harmless in what's going on. But I'm sure after December, they're going to want to see some return to business as usual. Their concern is always that quality is not going by the wayside. We had a conference call yesterday with the other accreditors and made mention of the fact that the distance learning guidelines have come out from the department now. And there's some concern that they've let too much flexibility in by some groups, and then there are other groups that say there's not enough flexibility. So they're working with us diligently. They've got a lot going on, and the staffing at the department was not 100%. So they've got the double duty of doing a lot of different things that they had not done before with limited staff. So we're waiting day by day just to see what's coming out, but they've done no harm, which is always the best news that I can give. We have an election in November. I don't know what's going to happen next year. I don't know if the same people are going to be in place. I don't know if we're going to have a totally new regime or what. So we're all just kind of taking it day by day.
So in your opening, you talked about the assessment piece, and one of the keen areas of SAC-COC and the other accrediting is documenting continuous assessment. So how are you going to move forward in that area, and what can we share with institutions in terms of the preparation they need to address the issue of assessment for spring semester and summer semester?
What we have told institutions is that this is a 10-year process. And so don't send me a report that says we have no assessment data when all you're missing is the spring of 2020 and perhaps the summer of 2020. You've still got 9 years of assessment data that you can provide. But we do ask that you document where you were in the assessment cycle when the pandemic hit and how you're going to recover from that. There's still online surveys that can be done. There's still analysis of data that can be done, even though it may be done after the fact, may not be done until fall, spring of next year, just to make sure to document that the data that you do have, and that this is, where you stopped when the pandemic hit and when you're going to pick it back up.
Well, one of the big concerns that we're seeing throughout the country, not only in the SAC-COC region, but throughout the country, and that is the physical impact, the financial impact on institutions. And so could you give us some discussion and feedback in terms of how SAC-COC is going to be looking at financials of institutions going forward?
It's going to be longer than a one board meeting process, Dr. Silver. institutions that are coming up for this coming board meeting at the end of August, their finances were already reported. So it's not going to impact that group and the way the board would assess them. It's going to begin with the institutions coming up in December and what happens with and subsequently. And so part of what we're doing is this is not dissimilar to what happened in the last recession, in that you had this major drop. We are well aware that enrollments potentially will drop. We're well aware that funding will drop, though the infusion of dollars from the federal government will help cushion somewhat. It's not going to fill every gap that happened because of loss of enrollment or anything else, but I was very pleased that they came up with the dollars that they did to be of some assistance to our institutions. I'm hopeful, and I don't speak for our board because I'm not a peer anymore since I left the institution. But the best I can say right now is that they're going to be understanding. What we're asking institutions to do is to make the best case possible for why your budget looks the way it does after the pandemic hit. That you are still responsible, however, for maintaining enough money to keep the institution open. That's all we've ever asked. We've never told institutions how much they have to have in endowments. We've never told them even how much they have to have in budget. What we say is you have enough money to keep the doors open. And that's what they will continue to review. There's going to be an expectation that if necessary, furloughs happen, layoffs happen, programs are cut. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you end up doing when finances hit. But I'm hopeful that at least in December, nobody's going to get on sanction because of the impact of the pandemic. That's certainly the message I'm going to give to the board. I'm hopeful that they've been listening to me for 15 years. I hope they don't stop now. But we all know it's tough because everybody's going through it. And so I think that we'll be okay, but you're going to have to make a case. You can't just say, well, ran out of money because the pandemic hit. That's not going to fly. You're going to have to make a strong case for the impact of the pandemic. What caused you not, what was it that you were not able to do because you lost enrollment or because of the pandemic? And then how have you made changes to accommodate those?
Well, let me ask a follow-up to that question. It's kind of going to be a touchy question in that some institutions were having financial issues before the pandemic. So now they come into the pandemic and that's going to be exacerbated. How are you all going to look at that particular situation?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know because I'm not a peer, other than to say institutions have to be able to make a case for how they were barely hanging on and they fell off. I think it's going to be a little easier than many institutions think because of that infusion of federal money that has come in. There's been a loss, but it's not nearly as large a loss as it could have been had those dollars not been made available. So we'll see. I'm hopeful that there's going to be a sense of we're going to give you a little more time than we ordinarily would have because of the pandemic, but it won't go on forever, I'm sure.
So several institutions have raised the issue about timing of presenting their 5th year report to the association and their 10-year reports. Is there going to be any flexibility in terms of submission dates for institutions?
We have dates that we've put in, and we always give exceptions. I mean, there's always a handful of exceptions institutions that ask for exceptions. Probably not right this minute, because everything changes by the day. Not more than a 30-day delay would we be able to permit, because otherwise the committees wouldn't have time to read the reports and give them adequate attention. But like the compliance certification is due September 10th, we could probably give till October 9th to give institutions an opportunity to get them in. We had one institution in Tennessee that not only was hit by the pandemic, but they had tornado that came through and hurt institutions. So we have given them a year extension on their reaffirmation. So, it's going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Right now, we've not made any blanket exceptions because this could go on for 10 years, this impact, and we're trying to keep it as much on schedule as possible. But we've been flexible and we'll continue to be so.
So one of the reverberating themes that I'm hearing in questions is, given this situation, is there any idea of new standards that might be on the horizon? I know 13.8 already asked folks to address pandemic issues. A lot of institutions failed to do that, but it is something, an expectation. But would there be any other standards?
I don't think there'll be any new standards, but I think there'll be some new directions to our institutions and our visiting committees on how to interpret, how to write up the response and how to interpret what they're hearing. I hope there are no new standards. That's a painful process. And we just went through that 2 years ago. But I do think there'll be more flexibilities that will be used to advise institutions that would be inserted into our handbook as opposed to the actual standards.
I know you don't have your crystal ball because it's cloudy here in Atlanta.
Yep.
But what advice can you give institutions as they are segueing to this new normal?
I need you to continue to keep students first and foremost in your mind. When you're talking about moving from on campus to online, make sure that you provide the training opportunities for the faculty who've never taught online so that it's not a total disaster. As you're talking about bringing them back to campus, make sure that you have adequate safeguards in place for their health and safety. That's going to be another big one in our standards that will need to be addressed. How are you going to ensure the safety of students in this pandemic? What kinds of safeguards are you putting in place that you didn't have before, for example? I think and first and foremost, or secondly, because students are still first and foremost, don't panic and don't assume the worst from your accreditor. Like I said, these are your peers that are coming in to do the evaluations. They're all having to struggle through this the same way. And so when they do send you back, in our case, the compliance certification, they'll provide some feedback for you on maybe ways that you hadn't thought about responding to something that they had used. I tell people when they're involved in the accreditation process, you always learn something. Even if it's no more than boy, I'm glad I don't work there. You still learn something. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for you and your peers to have an interaction on, this is what we've done. Here's some things that you might consider doing instead. So, it's gonna be okay. Those institutions that are what I call fragile institutions, I'm sure are panicking, especially where the finances are concerned. Again, I am not a voting member of the board, but I think they all have hearts and they all understand that we're all going through this. And so I think they would probably, if this was your turn to go on to warning, I would imagine they're going to at least give you 6 months longer. They may ask you to monitor you for 6 more months to give you a chance, to come out from under this pandemic. But I don't think that they're going to just drop you because it's, you just didn't meet the guidelines.
So, and I'm just thinking now from a global standpoint, I know that some institutions were scheduled to be visited, as you indicated earlier, and now their dates have been moved. What words of wisdom can you give those institutions to just kind of calm down just a little bit?
Yeah. We have not changed the fall dates that were scheduled or the spring dates that were scheduled. We have added this past year's dates to it. So all I can ask is that you work with your vice president to make sure that the visit's still on, to see how many people might actually be showing up versus how many might want to participate or need to participate virtually. We don't want you to get behind because we know all the work that each of you has done for this process and that you want to be through with it. Even though for me, accreditation is one of those lifelong phenomenons, and if you are dealing with it annually, then the 10-year process is not so onerous. But to work with your staff member from the accrediting organization to say, okay, are we still going to do this? If so, what is the strategy going to be? Obviously, the documents will still need to be submitted because the committees have to have something from which to work to learn about you. But you know, and if we have to move the date, don't be afraid to say, you know, we've still got a shelter-in-place order, so I need to shift this date, you know, into the next semester, for example, if you're not in Georgia and everything's wide open. You know, we're human beings and we understand, and we'll try to accommodate you as best we can. And I feel very comfortable saying that that's true for all of the accreditors.
We've had several institutions to, again, getting back to the assessment piece, wanting to know, would there be any different expectations in terms of documenting the learning that is actually taking place during this online experience?
Right this minute, the only exceptions will be that we recognize that you won't have data for the spring and the summer. Beyond that, we've not had a conversation yet, and I won't be able to have it till I meet with the board in the end of August to find out what kinds of directions to give forth, you know, going forward. I think that, again, right now, all you can do is submit the data you have and then talk about when you stopped collecting data because of the pandemic. You know, there's nothing else to do right this minute. So we'll see once I get to meet with the board to find out, you know, which direction they want to go after that. Then I will personally send out another email. I've been sending regular emails, and if your presidents have not been sharing them with you, we have posted them on our website. There's a section on coronavirus, and every communique that I've sent out is there. I've got another one that's going out this afternoon, as a matter of fact. So later this afternoon, you can check to see, you know, what's going on. But we've tried to keep everybody apprised of, you know, of the expectations and how it's going. You're asking me right now nuts and bolts that I don't have the answers to.
One of the questions that have surfaced, and I'm sure that some of our Zoom audience might have the same question, is that given the rapid movement that institutions had to make from off campus to on campus, how many institutions actually had to petition for actually getting online courses now? Because some of them didn't have it, or some didn't have the prerequisite number.
In the Higher Learning Commission, they have about 900 members, and I think Barbara said 129 had to be given waivers. In our region, we have 792 members, and about 75 had to be given waivers. That was the group to which I alluded earlier that said, you've gotten this waiver now, hopefully through December 31st, but there's no guarantee you'll have it after that. So we're asking you to go through the process of getting the approval in case the department says, you know, we've bent over backwards as far as we can go. You've had time now to come back and get that program approved. And for us, all it takes is choosing one program for which you want to offer 50% or more of a degree, and, you know, putting it online. Once you get one program approved, anything else that's already been approved for your institution can then go online.
So as we're looking at this, do you think that this move to online is going to impact how our member institutions deliver in the future?
I think for institutions that have not delivered online before, they will continue to offer some of their programs. I don't think the students particularly like online instruction. You know, as much as I enjoy technology, I would have great difficulty doing online instruction because I depend too much upon personal interactions. And there's more to college than just, you know, sitting in front of a computer answering them if you have that option. I mean, all of the clubs and organizations and the bands and the choirs and the debate clubs and everything else that are out there are part of a collegiate experience. And so I don't think that we're ever going to totally move away from on-campus experiences. I just think that right now it's going to be until people feel comfortable enough that the health and safety and well-being of the students is being considered going back to campus. But I think we will come back.
I noticed on yesterday, the California system made a pretty profound announcement indicating that they will not come back on campus for the fall semester.
Right.
Are you hearing anything else about that in some of the other areas?
Oh, there are a lot of institutions that have opted for more online than on campus or totally online. There's not as many as I would have thought, though there are also still quite a few institutions that have not decided yet. They're still waiting to see, where the shelter-in-place orders are and whether there's a vaccine or anything else that's going on. Many of them are putting off until the summer for making that decision. But I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of institutions are predominantly online instructional offerings than on campus. I also know that several institutions have decided there'll be no athletic program this fall too. I don't know if NCAA has come out with a statement yet because I don't follow NCAA as closely, but it's going to be impacted. There's no doubt about it. I know they're talking about Major League Baseball coming back with no people in the stands just because people want to see something on TV other than reruns. But it really is a one day at a time kind of decision making that's going on.
One of the things I'm sharing with individuals, I'm saying that it's sort of like grandmama used to say, if people give you a lemon, make lemonade out of it. And so
margaritas.
I know Cotton Brown would love that. So one of the things I'm saying is to them is that this is a golden opportunity to really look at all of your academic programs and to do a comprehensive review and to see what kinds of adjustments you might need to make in general, not just because of going offline or going online, but looking at it from a more holistic standpoint to kind of see where your strengths and weaknesses are.
It is indeed that opportunity, but it's also tough when you're having to make decisions about what you're going to do this summer and fall, and those immediate decisions that need to be made to look long term. But it is in an optimum situation, an opportunity to say, okay, this is where we've been, this is where we're going to go. I know that a couple of the accreditors have already put out surveys and had town hall meetings with their members about, what's happening, what are you learning, where do you think you're going next? We have a survey that will be coming out the 1st of September because I know that nobody needs a survey right now. They need to be able to put some things in place for the summer and fall, but shortly after the fall semester begins, a look back on what did you learn? What did you have to do differently? How do you handle those practical experiences that got put on hold with your nursing students or your respiratory therapy students, or how did you handle your welding courses when you have labs and stuff, and students weren't able, and what are you going to do in the future as far as those are concerned? So the immediate decisions by all means are overriding any futuristic looks, but it would be a wonderful opportunity to stop and say, okay, where do we go now? I just don't have the faith quite yet that they're in a position, most institutions are in a position to do that because there's still too many immediate decisions that have to be made.
And I think what we were talking about, I was talking about in the context of the furloughs and the cutting back on the budget and immediate decisions that are going to have to be made. But I think what it really does is really reinforces the need to take Section 7.1 of the standards very seriously in terms of institutional planning and institutional effectiveness, the need to have a strong strategic plan and things of that nature. So I see that tie in also.
Without a doubt, although, and I know that planning is your forte, Pete. That was one of the things that we cherished about you, always providing that direction. But the reality is the pandemic has blown those plans to hell.
Yeah.
And they just have. And so it's almost like starting all over again to say, okay, this is what we had planned to do, but now that we don't have students on campus, now that we don't have revenue coming in, now that we are going to have to lay off faculty, what does that do to our strategic plan? That's definitely part of the decision making.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with that in terms of now it's going to have to understand the fluidity of this whole planning process because you're going to have to really make those decisions in right now time. There was another question that folk asked about if you would just give a general statement about how you see SAC-COC in the moment as it relates to the general education, the general accreditation process with the backdrop of C-19?
Today, this could change tomorrow, but today we're asking folks to not lose sight of the fact that quality is still first and foremost, and to whatever we end up providing students, whatever the educational opportunities that you maintain the quality of the academic program that you had before the pandemic. That's all we can ask. Whether that's done online, as I said earlier, to make sure that if you're going online, that you have faculty and staff who are trained to work online. There's a different set of skills that are needed to provide distance learning than there are in a classroom. That if you're going to open your campuses, that you have safeguards in place for those students so that they feel safe and secure coming back to campus. That if you're going to have to make some cuts in order to make sure that you've got enough money to keep the institution going, then you're going to have to make those cuts. So we're not asking you to do anything differently than we've asked you to do in the past. We're just saying, don't let the pandemic stop the good work that you've been doing in the past. Show us instead how you're going to be able to survive in spite of that pandemic, rather than we can't go on because of the pandemic. This is a time for creativity, no doubt about it. It's a time for soul searching. It's a time for making some of those cuts, hard cuts that you didn't have to make. I tell people it's amazing how the accreditors get credited with, parenthetically blamed for, a whole bunch of stuff. So now you can blame the pandemic instead of blaming the accreditors. All you have to do is explain to the accreditors the impact that pandemic had.
Dr. Wheelan, before we kind of see what's in the chat box for questions, we have a question of concern, actually, and that is about your staff and how they're doing and how they navigating through this process and their well-being during this process. We're talking about institutions, but you got a staff also that you got to manage.
Yeah, it's crazy. We have been out of the office now since something like the 21st of March. They have, the vice presidents have regular Microsoft team meetings to which I am not privy. So Nuria, I know, is one of my staff members, is on the call. Maybe she can tell you, but they're in constant communication with each other. We've had regular Zoom meetings among the staff to keep apprised of what's going on. Policies that have come up. The executive council has been phenomenal in this whole process because they're charged with acting on behalf of the board when the board's not meeting. So you can imagine that all the exceptions that have come through and the policy decisions that we have to make, have been keeping them busy. So I want to give a shout out and a thanks to them for all of their time and efforts as well. But they're doing okay. We miss not seeing each other. We have been going in, about 14 of us have been going in once a week on Tuesdays to check the mail, make sure it's scanned into the staff so that they can see what's going on. And so I can sign checks and letters that are going out. But otherwise, we're all getting very familiar with our own abodes.
Well, thank you so very much. We are at the 45-minute mark, and we said we would go 45 minutes and then see if there are different questions in queue, or if someone has a question based on the comments that you made. So before we go into that session, I just want to say thank you again and thank Rita for helping us get you on and what have you. So Jennifer, are there questions in queue that might want to bring up?
Yes, I have a few questions that are shown here, and I'll kind of go back and forth so they can see you all versus me. So one of the questions was, Dr. Wheelan, you mentioned 3 statements about coming out with finance, assessment, and quality. Do you know when those statements will be available?
Rita is emailing them out this afternoon, and Dee is putting them on the website first thing in the morning. So by noon tomorrow at the latest.
Great. Another question was, we're using the terms online and remote learning interchangeably, but they are different. How does the accrediting body view them? And could you help us with making sure we're using the proper terms So when we are up for accreditation, we are actually doing online learning or whatever is expected of us in the respective accrediting body.
Yeah, Mox next to us, wherever you're providing instruction, whether it's underwater or on land and sea, we just want to know what it is you're doing, make sure the outcomes are the same for whatever that modality is as they are on campus. We recognize that there is a difference in online and remote learning, but for us, it's just whatever you're doing, explain it to us.
Mm-hmm. And I think I think you're exactly right. Well, I know you're exactly right, but what we need to help them to understand is that they're still going to have to make sure that they have their learning outcomes, right. And it should be the same as those in their major programs, no different from there, right. And to assess the learning that is taking place. So, any other questions, Dr. Ellis?
Dr. Sylvan, I would add to that a lot of people are now doing what we call remote learning. That's not exactly the same as the rigor of an online learning experience. And so simply moving their didactic lectures to a Zoom format or another format is not the same as online learning. And that's the distinction that I think the question was asked.
Yeah, it's not.
And I do understand that. All I'm saying is it doesn't matter to us where learning is occurring. What matters to us is that the quality of it is the same, that you don't lose that quality just because you're not on campus or in a traditional online program.
Dr. Ellis, is there another question?
Yes, there's one about the pass-fail and implications for those who are applying for professional schools.
We've had to defer those to the professional licensure accreditor agencies and the programmatic accreditors, because that's not something that we deal with on a regular basis. That's going to vary from state to state and discipline to discipline. So we just have to refer people to their respective licensure agencies.
The next question talks about accreditation and the implications with budget and the use of adjunct faculty and because we're not able to, there's hiring freezes on many campuses, and what implications that would have on accreditation where some departments like social work, you have to have X number of faculty and their faculty, full-time faculty, but they can't hire right now. So what implications would that be if they're filled with adjunct faculty members?
Yeah, we have a standard that talks about full-time, part-time ratios, that we got rid of the actual ratio and just ask you to explain, how you still have full-time faculty available to students. It is the programmatic accreditors that have a stricter number of full-time, part-time faculty ratios than we do. And so I would defer to ask people to contact the specific programmatic accreditor for those. Nursing, for example, has a 10-to-1, I think. You mentioned social work. I don't know what theirs are, but they're not our levels. As far as we're concerned, again, it would be the same thing that happened during the recession. Make the case for why you've had to lay off full-time faculty and hire part-time faculty. People are going to understand that as long as you make a strong case for it.
And then some other questions are regarding those who are up for a 10-year visit online and what suggestions you would have for those institutions.
For a 10-year visit?
That's what it says. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, 10-year. I thought you said tenure.
Oh, I'm sorry. 10-year.
Don't give me any more than I can handle.
No, a 10-year. I'm sorry. I had a little.
Again, for those who are up for a decennial review visit or 10-year visit, work with your vice president on the staff to find out, if you can get all the documents in place. If you can't, ask for an exception. For a while, we're willing to shift things around. We accredit 80 institutions a year. And I can't redo 80 visits, into the following year when there are also 80 visits. But for some, we can make some extensions. Right now, all we're looking at doing is extending deadlines. We're not looking at extending, reaffirmations.
Okay. And I have another question about HBCUs and the financial burdens on them. Are there any specific standards do you see that will be challenging for these institutions who have lacks of Pell Grants and eligibility for students? And then also some issues with respect to technology and the digital divide for those institutions.
Yeah, again, the HBCUs benefited from the CARES Act money, but they also got additional dollars for being an HBCU. There was a special pot of money that came in from them. I encourage them to fill out all the forms they have to fill out to get that money, because it is there and it's available to them. Beyond that, again, we're just back to making a case for why they can't move forward because they don't have the dollars. I saw also a question there, if you've been approved to offer an online program, do you have to get any more approvals? No, that's what I was saying. Once you're approved to offer a program online, any other approved program that you already have, you can offer online.
Okay, and another question is, how has the substantive change with the U.S. Department of Education requirement to change to institutional accreditors instead of regional and national accreditors?
That has nothing to do with COVID-19, but the Department of Education has chosen not to refer to national or regional accreditors anymore, but to refer to institutional accreditors, which was fine. We've already been institutional accreditors. And that part of their rationale was because they said students who attended nationally accredited institutions had difficulty getting their credits accepted at regionally accredited institutions. The challenge with that argument is I have students attending regionally accredited institutions that we accredit who can't get their credits accepted at other regionally accredited institutions we accredit. So for us, that logic didn't hold water. But the other argument is that our institutions are now offering programs or have off-campus instructional sites outside of the traditional boundaries of the regional accreditor. Right now, our institutions offer programs in 46 of the 50 states. And so they're saying we, by default, are national accreditors. So they've chosen to refer to us as institutional accreditors, though they've said that we can still call ourselves regional. And they've left up to our boards whether they will accept applications from institutions outside of our traditional boundaries.
And the last question I have is for someone who says, what suggestions can you share with higher education professionals who are not included in the accreditation process, but would like to learn more and get involved in the accreditation process?
Well, first thing you can do is start with our website and read everything you wanted to know about our accreditation and our process, but we're afraid to ask. The second thing is to let your president know that you'd like to get involved and serve on a peer review committee. There's a form to fill out in our region and get you trained and get you out on teams. For your own institution, there's a 5th-year report and a 10-year report in our region. Volunteer to serve on some of those committees. Don't wait to be voluntold, but step up and volunteer. Beyond that, I don't know.
Well, Dr. Wheelan, I want to thank you again on behalf of AABHE. We're going to all give her a big hand. Yay. And I want you to know, Dr. Wheelan, I was on my good behavior today because I had 3 of my former supervisors on this Zoom. I got you, I got Brown, and I got Roz. So I was trying to be a good captain. But I'm gonna make one little word since my president of the association asked me to do so. The study tour for AABHE for 2020 was going to Ethiopia and Dubai. And so we have postponed that to 2021. And it's going to be absolutely wonderful. I see some of the people on Zoom that have traveled with us before, including
Dr. Wheelan.
Dr. Wheelan, that's right. She went to Egypt with us, and we had a great time there. So we will open it up for other folk to join us if you want to. We haven't lost anybody, Derek, from the original group, but because we have a little bit more time to plan, if there are others who want to travel with us, if you'll just send information to me, I'll be glad to accommodate you. I think the actual information is on the website. And so you can just follow that lead and get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to have you join us. And so I'm going to ask Dr. Derek Roveris from LSU to give us the last words.
Go
Well,
Tigers.
again, we thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and it has been a true delight. So informative, Dr. Wheelan. You always inform, and you always do it with such aplomb. It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to be in your distant company. I want to thank you all and wish you all the very best. As I've been encouraging people, there's a lot of noise in my background. I'm sorry. Can't stop it. But I want to encourage all of you to be very safe. And to do your very best work. On behalf of AABHE, we thank you.
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy and be on the lookout for the next seminar. Dr. Wheelan, I love you. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.